Morgan Stanley has analyzed what the effect of cuts to food stamps will do to major corporations. So let's find out what they found out. So there's tons of questions right now about what will happen to food stamp benefits, how will retailers be affected, and then of course, how about the manufacturers of the packaged food and the beverages, okay? And all of this is really going after like the big beautiful bill, and as well as these USDA waivers on different foods, because some of them are banning junk food and chips and things of that nature. Right now, it's proposed that they're going to cut $290 billion in SNAP funding over the next 10 years. Okay, that's not like a little chunk of change. Okay, that's a good amount. And currently, right now, there are 42 million people in the US that rely on food stamps to buy groceries. Okay. Right. So Morgan Stanley, big financial company, they actually did a bunch of like overall economic impact studies. Okay. And they're now saying that they're estimating that the impact may not be as significant as it initially appeared. Because when you think of $290 billion no longer being spent, some of these big name companies, that could hurt a lot, you know? And they're saying that food and beverage industries would be affected the most, which makes sense, But according to the Center for American Progress, more than 27,000 retailers in largely rural counties carry the highest risk of being negatively impacted. And so what they're saying is that some stores in low-income neighborhoods have more than 50% of their sales come from food stamps. So what you're looking at is on average a 20% decrease in the amount of like money being loaded to cards. So if these retailers then get a 20% cut in their sales, it would be difficult for stores like this, especially in food deserts, to even remain open. Right. Okay. Yeah. And that information came from the National Grocers Association. Now, even large retailers, we're talking about Walmart, they currently, they will be affected simply for the fact that 94% of food stamp shoppers have purchased groceries from a Walmart in the last 12 months. That's a lot. Okay. Yeah. And then think about your budget retailers. We're talking about convenience stores like 7-Eleven, Dollar General, Dollar Tree, and even some grocery chains like WinCo. They capture roughly twice the market share among food stamp users than they do of those that don't use food stamps. Okay, so that when you think about that, that's pretty monumentous. Yeah, great. Now, Morgan Stanley is expecting that the SNAP cuts will end up totaling about $150 billion, okay? And with only about 90 to 100 billion coming from reduced benefits, okay? And this is simply because part of the change is that the federal government isn't necessarily lowering the amount that would be loaded onto a card, but now over the next 10 years, the states will then have to pay upwards of 5 to 25% of the money that goes on the cards, but that's based on their error rate. So if you're a state that has a really high error rate, all of a sudden you're going to have to come up with 25% of the funding for food stamps. And you know what happens if you can't come up with that? Like if you can't raise taxes, if you don't have the ability to pay that every year, it means they just cut it out. So through no fault of your own, you could lose 25% of your food stamp benefits just because the state you live in can't afford to pay for it. Okay, that's insane. Okay. Now, their like whole economic report, they're saying that this could slightly hurt packaged food sales and create a small slowdown for drinks, especially if the USDA limits the purchases of soda or energy drinks. Okay. Right. But Morgan Stanley identified Kraft Heinz and Conagra as the most exposed, or basically the most affected by SNAP cuts. Whereas companies like Coca-Cola, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and Monster are actually in better positions for these cuts simply because they have very strong pricing and brand power. Okay. And some other companies that you might recognize, WK Kellogg, which is the cereal version of Kellogg Company, and then JM Smuckers, which owns like 92 different brands, they expect them to be hit the hardest because over 22% of their sales come from low income shoppers. Okay. Because think about it. JM Smuckers, they sell peanut butter, they sell jelly, they sell Uncrustables, all things that low income shoppers are more likely to buy. The WK Kellogg's, they sell cereal. You know, they also sell some snack foods and stuff like that. But you know what I mean? It totally makes sense. And so they're estimating that between inflation squeezing people's grocery budgets and then more low income consumers, they're not only going to shift away from brand names, like if they're currently purchasing brand names, that it's going to drive them to purchase even more store brands. Right. So store brands may actually see an increase in sales, but some of these big, huge, like legacy type companies are going to be feeling some hurt. But it does surprise me that even with these USDA waivers, they're estimating that some pretty big companies, like soda companies, not going to hurt them at all. Okay. And how is that possible if all this money on food stamps is going to buy soda?
Because the majority of it's not. It's exactly like you may splurge on one or two items to include in your shopping trip, but it's not the lion's share of your food. Like you're not buying 12 packs of sodas and like one bag of frozen broccoli. Look, we did it. Like people are buying.
But I am going to estimate that you're probably buying a lot of peanut butter and jelly. You're probably buying a lot of cereal. You're probably buying a lot of mac and cheese. You know, basic staples that are things that kids would eat.
Yep.
You know, you're probably buying some frozen foods, which JM Smuckers actually has a lot of frozen foods. So I can see where those companies would be the most hit. But, you know, I hate to be like Debbie Downer, you know, negative Nancy, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or you're Democrat. When you are going after the most vulnerable people in your country and you're making it even harder for them while you're giving breaks to those that are like top 1%, it doesn't make sense. Like it literally doesn't make sense. You are not going to make... You're not going to make America great again by kicking poor people while they're down.
Forced starvation. That's it. Like, the majority of people who are on food stamps are senior citizens and families.
Yeah.
So
people that are disabled.
And people who are disabled. Yeah. Those are your three largest demographics. Somewhere in there you have some single people who don't make enough money to sustain themselves. So this make sure that they're fed, but the bulk of those people are those who are already in a vulnerable state. And then you're saying, that's not vulnerable enough for me. Let's make it even harder.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've seen this, but there was a lady on TikTok who she went into her food stamp office, she applied, and she basically said, I'm homeless. I don't have a job. I don't have anywhere to live. Nobody will take me in. I need food stamps. And they were able to go ahead and give her a good amount of food stamps, which is kind of suspect right there because she has no place to live. You know what I mean? But yet you're giving her, it was like $400 to $500 in food stamps, but you're not making sure she has somewhere to go. You know what I mean? So that part was already a little off. Well, so she went on TikTok and she told people to go apply for food stamps and tell them that they're homeless. Okay. And I guess somebody recognized her and called her county DFACS office and said, hey, this chick lives in a really nice apartment. She makes, she has a job. She makes money off social media, da da da. And so she got, they served her with paperwork. She actually ended up getting arrested for fraud. And I think it was some absurd amount where they're saying she now owes back $35,000, which I'm guessing part of that is like penalties and fines. Yeah. But that is not the norm. Okay.
No, it's really not.
And I have even seen where, I hate the way that this sounds, but I used to hang out at children's hospitals a lot. My daughter has a lot of health issues, so we hung out at the hospital a lot. And yes, we encountered people that when you ask them, they say they're married, but then you find out on paper that they just live with somebody and they purposely don't get married just so that way they could claim that they were a single mom with zero income, so that way they could get different benefits. But once again, I would say that that is like 1 out of 1,000 cases. There is not this rampant fraud that's out there. And so a lot of those that are for this bill and for this cuts are all talking about that we're going to get the illegals off of it. We're going to catch all this fraud. We're going to do that. In reality, they may catch a few people that are on it fraudulently. They may. But more than likely, they're going to kick off people or they're going to reduce benefits for people that genuinely need it. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying that, is it worth it? Is this one of those where, you're going to have some friendly fire or you're going to have some people get hurt along the way? Is catching the one fraudulent guy really worth kicking, 1,000 people off to catch him?
No.
To me, it seems overkill.
It's kind of like when I look, it's similar. Anytime anybody's like, fraud is rampant, and then you look at the actual statistics of it, the likelihood of actual fraud is so minuscule compared to what's being touted as the problem. Yeah. And that's the thing, we do have a lot of systems in place to keep things like this from happening. That lady, the TikTok lady, she exploited a hole in the system, and then she got brazen about it because, hello, social media, and it backfired. Yeah. And she absolutely deserves to be fined if you're going to blatantly defraud a government agency. But that's such a small percentage.
It is. And when you're talking about 42 million people over the entire U.S., okay, and I want to say there's 360 million people total, okay? Right. So you're talking about 20%, and the majority of the 20% have children, okay? And we're not even getting into the whole, as soon as you're 8 years old, you're no longer considered a dependent, okay? We're just talking about that they're trying to cut fraud. Do you know what 1% of 42 million is? 420,000.
Okay.
Okay. And they're stating that their best estimate is 0.01% of those on SNAP is fraudulent. So now you're talking about 4,200 people. That's it. And in most states, the most you can get is $1,000. Okay. So we want to cut, what was it? $190 billion in order to save $400,000 a year. You see what I mean? That doesn't make sense.
No. And the amount of people that will get hurt in the process is much larger. Yeah. So we're willing to risk injury to a large number of people.
In the grand scheme of things, do I really care that, big, huge companies like Kraft Heinz and Conagra, or even the Kellogg's and the Smuckers are going to lose a little money, even if they lost 22%? Probably not, because our whole food system is based on for-profit for corporations. Okay. Yes. And they still are going to make a crap ton of profit no matter what, even if they lose 22% in sales. But what I do care about is all the people that's going to lose their benefits that shouldn't. And I know you always hear, well, I saw so-and-so buy a big old cart full of soda and crackers. And the one I keep hearing all the time, they bought crab legs and steak. And who cares? Who really cares?
We're all trying to up our protein, damn it.
Right. But at the end of the day, Any cuts to SNAP are going to affect the actual people that get the benefits.
Yeah.
We've already shown that it's going to affect the entire economy of the location where those food stamps are spent.
Yep.
And then it's going to eventually, like as a very tail end, affect these food manufacturers. And do you think these food manufacturers are just going to take a 22% loss in sales?
No.
Oh, hell no.
God.
All they're going to do is they're going to up their prices 22% to compensate.
Yeah.
And so it feels like everything that they're doing to solve this ginormous problem, which is actually teeny tiny, is they're just going to keep adding to our grocery prices, you know?
Yeah.
So let us know down below. What are your thoughts on this kind of trickle down and this economic impact report of what these SNAP cuts will look like? Let us know what your thoughts are.